Hey everybody, we're here, and look, I've got a special guest, and I'm excited. I would never have thought I would have G-Man on, just because, like, I just never thought my channel would ever be in a position to have G-Man on, but I am super excited because we've got G-Man on, and I absolutely love that this video, before it started, got more dislikes on it than the one I did about Katie Joy yesterday. And that's to me that's brilliant and amazing. And so it tells me that G-Man's got people that are more active than Katie does. So welcome. How are you? How you doing? I like your hat.
Oh, thank you. I'm doing fine. I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Something different, that's for sure.
Yeah, we're not beefing it out this time. This time.
Yeah, not this time. Maybe next time, but not today.
So today we're actually going to be taking a look at Agree to Argue's video. They were talking, Steve and Dr. Fuzz were talking about biblical slavery and asking the question, is God pro-slavery? And they had Dr. Josh on, and there were a couple of points that we thought would be conducive to more like needed to be expounded upon, I think would be a good way to put it. There's a couple things that kind of got brushed over because, I mean, they're a limited show. There's only so much time in the day. And as far as I know, they're actually going to be having another one. So maybe some of the questions and some of the things we discuss here will actually get answered by them on their episode later on. I believe is this month, if I'm not mistaken. I think Steve is in the chat. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. I got my Sleemans ready to go.
I don't have anything, so...
You don't even get water?
I wasn't smart enough to go get them, but maybe next time I will be. I don't know. That's cool here, but I might eat a cracker. I don't know.
Yeah, all right. So let's, what... I think a lot of people actually misunderstand what your position is when it comes to biblical slavery, particularly like with your last appearance on the Non Sequitur show. I mean, congratulations on your win. I don't think I ever congratulated you, but yeah, no. 2v1. You kicked ass. But I think people misunderstand what you're saying. So go, please explain to us what your position is.
Okay. First and foremost, a lot of times when people listen to me talk about slavery in the Bible, it's usually a response, something that was said to me either on the Drunken Peasants or just the atheists at large about whether or not it's wrong to own a person or whatever. When I first started talking about this, the atheists that I was speaking to would say to me that slavery is wrong across the board. That's what they would say. And then I would think about what they said, and I'd be like, well, I don't think that is wrong in of itself. I think there are things that happen to slaves that I think is disgusting and we can get into. But as far as it being wrong across the board, I would say no. So you're going to hear me saying certain things in this video that's going to contradict a certain individual that was on here a little bit earlier. But I'm going to stay true to who I am and what I know about this. I can assure you of that. But yeah,
the one thing that I value that people know me for... The one thing that people know me for and know the thing that I value is consistency. If you're consistent, you probably won't hear much of a peep out of me because, you know, people are going to think what people are going to think. Now, it's great if you should be able to back up what you're saying and explain to people. If you're going to discuss or bloviate about what your position is, you should probably be able to explain your position in a conducive manner, something in a way that people can understand what you're saying, because otherwise what's the point? Like, what would the point be of having the conversation if you're not able to conversate, right?
Exactly. And I can explain why I believe the things that I believe very well. So like I said, I'm looking forward to this show, and looking forward to correcting some things that was said in that.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to hearing those corrections. So let's take a look at, I made a couple of notes because I watched this video I think 3 times now. I watched it when it was live. I watched it again and 2 times in preparation for this. One to just kind of be a little bit more analytical, and then once more to actually take my notes. And so one of the things that I think we were going to start with what Steve had said is that there's like slavery is he mentioned that slavery was a little bit of a difficult topic for people to talk about, and I think this is something that you talk about pretty regularly, is that people don't necessarily know how to argue this, right? So do you have you want to touch on that?
Yes. Number one, I don't believe that Caucasians should be scared to talk about this topic, because every society that's ever existed at some point or another has had slaves. I would even say that the early Europeans were slaves to somebody back in the day. So if Black people can talk about it, Hispanic people can talk about it, and Indian people can talk about it, then everybody else can talk about it, and they shouldn't be afraid to talk about it. However, when you do talk about it, you should speak. You should just be blunt and just say what you believe about it, and not try to clout chase like I think some other people try to do, and try to look good in front of everybody, because that's not really your opinion and your own, and it's not really your position on it. If your position is that the early settlers or the early people that lived in this country went to Africa and they got slaves, and this is what you agree with and this is what you don't agree with, then say it. Then we can have a conversation about it.
Be clear.
If you believe if you believe that slavery in America should have never happened, say it and make sure you know why you believe it. If you believe that slavery in America was necessary, but you disagree with how the slave was treated, then say it and explain your case. You know what I mean? But don't get on here and pretend like you care about the topic, and then we expand on it and you don't know what to say about it. Because if you do, it ain't gonna end well for you. It just isn't. So
basically, the conversation should be pretty well open to anybody who wants to have the conversation, but don't pussyfoot around. Don't beat around the bush. Because it makes it too... one thing that I've noticed is in politics or SJW-ish type stuff, it makes the conversation almost impossible to have, because people are either trying to be so careful or so jumpy or have such a chip on their shoulder about the topic that you can't find the place to actually start the conversation to jump off. Puck has joined us. And he actually needs a boot because we got a super chat. Christopher Hugan for $2 says, define slaves, please. There is a BDSM community. Yes, okay. That is another thing that we wanted to get into, because Steve brought up chattel slavery versus indentured servitude versus being a debt servant versus a hired labor type situation. So where do you, if you were going to define slavery, because, even what you would define as slavery in the Bible might be different than what you would define as slavery in the early Americas. So where do you stand on that definition? And we'll just work off of G-Man's definition. I think that's fine.
Okay. So there's a couple of things I want to say about this, because the gentleman that we're going to be responding to that was on his channel the other day, I think he started off his conversation the wrong way. First of all, in our modern day, I think slavery is defined like this. I want to Google and I took a look at this. It says, wait a minute. It says sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, forced labor, bonded labor or debt bondage, domestic servitude, forced child labor, unlawful recruitment, and use of child soldiers. This is how our modern day government defines what slavery is. When we're talking about the Bible and what we're going to be getting into in a minute, I look at it like this, and this is how I go about defining it. If you're in bondage to something, then you are a slave to it. You can be in bondage to a human. You can be in bondage to a system. You can be in bondage to a vice. If you are in bondage to something, then you are a slave to that particular thing. A lot of Christians, for example, believe that we're not slaves to nothing, and that's not true. Although the scripture says that we are free to serve Christ, we're also his servants, according to the scripture. We're also slaves to his lordship as well. But it's not a contradiction of terms. You would be free and you also be a slave at the same time.
So you could essentially be free to choose servitude. Is that how you would put that? Okay. Right. Free to serve Christ. Yes. Okay. Now, do you think that could somebody be enslaved to a religion?
Oh, absolutely.
In a negative way. I'm understanding that you think that there's a positive way to do it, but do you think that there's a negative way to do that also? Whether they agree with you or not.
Jim Jones. They're gonna get mad at me when I say this. The Hebrew Israelites and several other folk out there. Yeah, definitely believe that you can be enslaved to a religion. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so like that sounds consistent to me. Although I would question if you're able to. Is there a difference? If you are a slave to an institution, let's say, or you're a slave, I think a lot of college students probably feel enslaved. Or if you're, especially since you're paying to be there. But if you're enslaved to, I don't know, say cigarettes, let's say you're addicted to cigarettes, you're addicted to nicotine, and so you're enslaved to that vice isn't necessarily going to tell you to do something outside of consume it. It's not conscious, it's not going to be able to give you an order, per se, but a human or maybe a system might be able to do that. So does that, how would that play out in your definition?
Oh, that's assuming that the thing that that you have a vice to is a human and it can speak to you. You know, you usually when you're in bondage to
Sure.
let's say crack cocaine, you can't stop using it. Even if you try, you just can't stop doing it. If you're in bondage to a human and what they're telling you, you're in a situation where you can't get out of it. And you have to do this until a set amount of time.
Okay.
And if you're in a situation, then you're a slave. You might not be in hardcore slavery like the transatlantic slave trade, but there are examples that we can come up with that wouldn't be as severe, but you are still a slave nonetheless.
Right. Okay, so that wouldn't necessarily play into that definition because at the end of the day, what you're saying in this definition, it does not matter whether it's conscious or not, whether it can give you direct orders or not, or whether you can communicate with it or not. It's just you are in bondage. Period. End of sentence. You count under this heading.
If a person can't express their own views and opinions or anything like that concerning the religion, and they don't have any like real freedoms in that particular religion to correct something or whatever, then yeah, that person's a slave to that particular thing.
Okay. I think that definition is fine. I don't see why it's not at least a workable definition, especially as long as it can be applied across the board, which it sounds like you've got a solid workable definition. So we can sort of, if you're fine with that, we can agree to talk about the video with the context of that definition in mind. Perfect. Okay.
Exactly. And if I can go first,
please.
The gentleman who was talking to Dr. Josh, if I can bring up the first point.
Yeah, please.
We talked about this in private. Named Dr. Raj, or his name was?
Fuzz Rana, yeah. Dr. Fuzz.
Fuzz Rana. Yeah, he said that God condemned slavery in the Bible.
Yes.
I think it comes from a disagreement with servant and slave. I listened to that and I was like, what? Okay, so this is where I'm going to sound a little hypocritical, and I know I'm probably going to catch some heat for this. God does not condemn slavery. There are rules in the Bible on how to treat your Hebrew slaves and your foreign slaves in the scriptures, okay? Him to condemn it, there wouldn't be any rules for it. I think what he's doing is he's saying that a servant and a slave are two entirely different things. And I'm saying that they're not. They are exactly the same. Okay, maybe on different levels, like you got a diet soda and you got a soda that has sugar in it or whatever, sugar-free soda from one that's got a ton of caffeine and sugar or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're still sodas. So, you know what I mean?
It's still fizzy water, spicy water.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you have a job. But me and you was talking about this, right?
Yeah.
You're from Canada, I'm from the United States, right? If you go work for somebody told you we're going to give you $20 Canadian to work the entire week at CVS or Walmart or something like that, you know what I mean? You're going to look at I'm like a slave to you. You got to pay me. I am paying you. I'm giving you $20 Canadian, and that's not slavery. But the reality is, all of us watching this will look at that as being a form of slavery. So
how does that?
Then it's still slavery, though.
How does that apply with the ability to leave, though? Now, I can understand, like, in an economic structure where you have to get a job to survive. And if everyone was paying $20 per week, you've essentially run into a problem where your labor laws are the equivalent to slavery. Is that accurate?
You can use that if you want. I would recommend that people protest to their government and get that place shut down for anti-human reasons or whatever. I wouldn't work there. I don't care what everybody else is working there for. Nobody can live on $20 a week.
Yeah, so you're saying that it would, if the society on a whole agrees to it, it would be considered slavery, but because you have options to protest, because you have options to get that changed, you would or wouldn't consider it slavery because you're not in bondage to that place.
Slavery, it's slavery in both scenarios, because if you're not able to make a living wage off of what you're working on, the $20 a week scenario that we did, that's slavery regardless in both scenarios. You know what I mean? Because at this point you're going to get paid, and what you're going to do with it? You didn't really work for nothing. They just stole your youth, they stole your energy, they stole everything about you. You know what I mean? And you're not getting anything back in return. Right. So you would be.
So you would be opposed to, basically what you're saying is that even if you're paid, if it's not a reasonable amount, it would still count as slavery to you because that's just not good enough. Versus, in short, you would be against like way low minimum wage.
Of course I would be, yes. I'll be totally against it. I would be against people, human beings working for another human being, and you're not getting anything back in return. Like that would be considered slavery to me. Or if you are getting something back in return, and it's like below like the poverty line. You know what I mean? That's slavery as well.
Dapper Dino actually asked in the chat, and I think this is a good question. Interns who are working for a company without pay, would you view that as slavery?
People that do volunteer work?
So there's people who do volunteer work, and then there's interns. Interns essentially... See, the internship isn't allowed in Canada the same way it is in America. In America, from my understanding, you essentially go to work a job, don't get paid because you're being paid in experience. I think that's bullshit, personally. I understand that there's a trade going on, but I think it's bullshit.
I would be closer to like maybe indentured servitude, I think. I think that would be closer to that. Anything else, but that's a good question.
But doesn't indentured servitude mean you have to owe somebody something in the first place?
I said with the interns, I would say that would be closer to indentured and closer to being an indentured servant, because you're getting something out of it. You're getting work experience. You still, but if you're going to be taught to the same way that the paid workers are going to be taught to, you know what I mean? Then yeah, you almost have to look at it like that, because you're still serving this company or corporation or whatever. So
yeah, I think that's fair. I don't like the way internship works in America, at least from my understanding of it. Unless there's some other nuance to it that I'm just not aware of, I'm not a fan. Even in Canada, I think it's kind of in most of the time, but you do get paid for your work as in Canada at the very least. It's bullshit.
The point that needs to be remembered is that if, as a matter of fact, if you read Think and Grow Rich and you go read and you go look at some of these wealthy people, they'll tell you that they believe a person who has a job is actually a slave at the end of the day. They're not somebody that should get the same rights that they got. Now, I don't agree with their thinking, but a lot of people in our society today do think that way. You know what I mean? The people that got jobs, they call them useless leaders and all this other stuff and whatnot. So, you know. It just depends on what we're talking about, I guess.
Right. I mean, I would agree with that. So I think the last thing that we kind of noted that Steve had said that was, like, at the beginning that kind of caught both of our attention was the God being cool with slavery but not actually being pro-slavery. So he's like, listen, God put in rules. Clearly he's not condemning slavery, because why would you have rules for something you're condemning? You would just say, no, don't do it. Versus he's not necessarily okay with it. He's not saying go out and get slaves.
Okay. So, I want people to take this into consideration about God's character. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He's sovereign. He's a sovereign Lord. He's sitting in heaven, and he has like all these angels that are serving him. You know what I mean? They're well taken care of. Don't get me wrong or whatever. Whatever.
You're going to talk about the economic structure of heaven.
Yeah, I mean, you have all these angels that are serving him,
Right.
and to a certain degree, there's a certain amount of bondage to that to it, but it's not a bad bondage. When Steve McRae says that God, what was it that God is not pro slavery, but he supports certain things within slavery? No. Yes, ideally speaking, God would have come up with a system where slavery wasn't involved whatsoever. If you look at the scriptures and you look at what God supports and what he rewards as opposed to what he doesn't reward, you know what I mean? It shows that God doesn't condemn it. It shows that God allows it. It's necessary for the system or the reasons that he has it for. And he gets rid of the stuff that all of us would think is disgusting, like man stealing, like treating your slaves like garbage. You know what I mean? Treating them like they're not a human being, raping your slave's wife, things like that and whatnot. You know
Yeah,
what I
mean? I would probably. Yeah, I would probably agree that God doesn't go out of his way to condemn rape. Like, didn't think I had to write that one down for you kind of thing. But he does put rules, like if you do, there's a punishment for that thing. Now, if there's a punishment for something...
What did you say about that again? You said that God doesn't condemn rape.
Yeah, I don't recall him going out of his way to say, hey, listen, don't do that thing. I do know that he put in rules like 7 shekels if you do, to be paid to the father, which is... I would say that in the same vein that maybe that's not a tacit accepting that rape is a thing. It might be considered a punishment for that thing and therefore would be viewed as condemnation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if somebody were to rape somebody in ancient Israel, they would be either killed or they would have to give restitution to the woman that was raped.
Right, and that's the same thing. And that's the same thing with slavery. So if you view that as a condemnation of rape, would that apply as a condemnation of slavery? If like the slave gets killed, there has to be restitution, or so if you were to kill somebody else's slave, there's restitution for it. If you like things along those lines. So it might. I
want to be careful with that because with the slavery part, while I said earlier that God isn't necessarily like that God is that God does permit slavery to be in the land of Israel under the guise of punishment, under the guise of helping the poor, under the guise of giving somebody labor.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean the slavery is a punishment. I'm saying that as if you harm a slave, harming that slave is considered a punishment, and so that could be considered condemnation of that harm, right?
Yeah, if somebody were to,
yeah, I think I said that weird.
If you were to kill your slave, or if you were to, rape that slave's wife, or cut off their foot because they ran away or something like that, like they did in the transatlantic slave trade, that master could either be put to death, or that master could end up losing the slave altogether. You know what I mean?
So you do.
Back in the Bible, they were supposed to stay going.
So you do put a hard line separation between biblical slavery and early North America slavery.
Yes, there's a big difference between slavery in the Bible and the transatlantic slave trade. First of all, most of the people that came over here to the Americas were stolen. The rest of them were bought.
Which is condemned in the Bible, right? Not human trafficking, like going and kidnapping is condemned, right?
Kidnapping is, yes. But then there's another issue that I know a lot of them get upset with, and that's the issue of war. We can get into that a little bit later. But the point of the matter is, you wasn't allowed to steal nobody and make them your slave. If you did that, they would be violating the Mosaic Law. Because one of the things I think that people forget regarding these conversations about slavery, you got to take into consideration that these are laws for the land of Israel. You know what I mean? There were laws for the owner and there were laws for the slave. You know what I mean? And they both were protected by that law.
Okay. And so you would say that having those protections in place is not condemnation, but is at least acceptance? So where would that fall in the pro-slavery versus accepting slavery, like what Steve had explained?
Well, as far as what Steve explained.
Well, Steve was saying like God's okay with slavery, but not necessarily pro-slavery. Like he's not advocating for it.
Yeah. Okay, again, that's another statement. Okay, so God allowed, okay, God allowed slavery in the Bible for the reasons of punishment. I have to go through the reasons because if I don't, then this ain't gonna make no sense to nobody.
No, yeah, that's
reasons of punishment, of providing for your family and for the poor as well, right? I think there was another reason too. It was also for warfare too, or whatever, right? To prolong, I guess, a people from another nation or whatever. But he has laws in place again to protect the slave and the slave master, because you don't want the slave to be mistreated, and then you don't want the master to lose out on why he has a slave to begin with. God would make laws that would prevent either one of them of being harmed. So Steve McCrae's comment doesn't make any sense, to be honest. It doesn't make no sense to me. God is obviously saying, look, you can have these people as your property. However, this is how you're supposed to treat them. That's what he's saying. And now the real issue is this. It's not the issue of whether or not he condones it or not. The issue is does God condone harmful actions to happen to a slave? That's the real issue. When I called the atheist experience and I talked to Matt Delonde, he was harping on, loopholes. He was harping on beating your slave, owning someone forever, like how a slave was actually going to be treated. Yeah. You know what I mean? As opposed to actually owning the slave. Right. Like I said before, I don't think there's anything wrong with a human being owning another human being in of itself. However, when we start talking about how they're treated, that's when you start, getting the horns or whatever, if you want to put it that way.
Okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, essentially, like, Matt Dillahunty was going on about how listen, you can beat a slave to the inch of their life, but as long as they don't die, what you're doing is okay, and that's the loophole he was talking about, as if that was going to be the common practice when that would be more of like an outlier.
That would be more of a punishment for the slave breaking the Mosaic law. You got to remember, and we talked about this before the show, right, if the master, for example, worked on the Sabbath day, if he got caught in the act of adultery, or if the master got caught in the act of working on the Sabbath day, the slave could pick up a stone and legally stone him to death. Way that if the slave the Mosaic law, he could be stoned to death, or if he got caught in the act of adultery or whatever, he could be stoned to death.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point, and I think I want to talk about it a little bit more, because it's really interesting to kind of explore this idea that the slave also had the right to the same Mosaic laws and their punishments and implications as the slave owner did. So just because you owned a slave in these times, again, I think people very much attach the transatlantic slave trade to the biblical terminology, which probably is not fair. So in one case, a slave doing that during the transatlantic slave trade time, no, that's a big no-no. Like your slave is not going to be able to protect themselves in any way, shape, or form during that time period. Whereas what you're explaining to me is during the biblical times, the slave had the same rights to punish or go after a master who was not following that same law that the slave was even a slave under, if that makes sense.
Right. And a simpler example is, and I mentioned this before we talked too, is that let's say this is Israel and you own me right now. I cannot work on the Sabbath day. No matter how much you ask me to do it, I cannot work on the Sabbath day, because if I work on the Sabbath day, according to the Mosaic law, you could pick up stones and start stoning me to death. I picked up a stick on the Sabbath day. You can stone me to death. I can't work. So if you look at the transatlantic slave trade, you work every day as long as the owner told you to work, and they could care less about your health. Right. You know what I mean? So it's very different.
So you would say that the slavery described in the Bible is not chattel slavery, and
it's not. Are you talking about the Hebrew slaves, or are we talking about foreign slaves? Or you want to know like in general? No, I don't believe that is chattel slavery. Not in the same sense of.
Sorry, I missed what you said. You cut out for a second. Can you repeat yourself?
I wouldn't say that is chattel slavery in the same sense that we understand it today. Because, like I said, we had rights. sorry, not we, but the Israelites had rights that now during the transatlantic slave trade, these they were less than chattel. Like if the president of the Confederacy saw a slave owner raping their slaves, good job, my man. You go out there and you breed some babies or whatever. That happened in the Deep South. Right. If that happened in ancient Israel, they would stone them to death for doing something like that.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So essentially what you're saying is that the slaves, the Israelite slaves had more rights than slaves during the transatlantic slave trade times. So comparing the two is not like if you say slave during this time, you're not talking about the same kind of slave as this over here.
Right, it's nothing. They're not the same. And when people like Matt,
I lost you. I lost you again. You might have to change the sensitivity. That's bizarre because you were fine, and then suddenly it was like, nope, not getting any audio. I'm seeing the green. It's telling me you're talking, but it's not coming through.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so when Matt Dillahunty talks about this topic, he's always trying to compare it to the transatlantic slave trade, and they're just not similar. Anybody can take the Bible and reword it to make it say whatever they want it to say. You know what I mean?
That is one of the problems of the Bible, yeah.
Yeah, it's not even it's people. You know what I mean? Because all an average educated person has to do is let's look at what life was like in the ancient Near East. That's all we got to do, and you're going to see that nobody during that particular time, but it was full practice, even in wartime. What people considered immoral was how the slaves was actually treated. That was the issue. The same way as the issue today. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like there's a lot of black people that got history books and will tell you stories about their ancestors being owned by the early settlers and say they were wonderful people. They were never beaten. They were never broken. None of those things ever happened. They were treated just like family. And then you got the other stories where you were whipped and had your name changed, your identity changed, everything was taken away from you, your women were raped. That's inhumane. You don't treat people like that. You know?
Okay. I mean, I have heard of situations where you're paid, if you're like a live-in maid or a live-in nanny or something along those lines. Part of what you're paid in, like your wage isn't as high because you're paid in like room, board, and food. So all of that is paid for you. So your minimum wage might be under what it would be for say like a living wage.
About indentured servitude.
Well, they don't owe them anything, right? So the maid doesn't owe the family anything, but they've taken a job that they've agreed to do for this wage, which is more of like an allowance, and they don't have to pay rent, they don't have to pay groceries, they don't have to pay utilities, they have all of this stuff already paid for them.
That sounds like an arrangement that they would have, like right. I know early on in history they had people that came from different countries that would come to the United States and they would pay for their, their travel and their paperwork and everything and whatnot. And then when they got here, you ran out of something to drink?
No.
You got another one. You gonna drink another beer?
I'm on my game today.
You gotta be drunk. Okay, so that when they actually came to the United States, they will work off their debt, but they would still be given like room and board and would be able to eat and whatnot. So
right,
a lot of people in Caribbean countries actually make those arrangements today. But let me ask you a question. I was watching ESPN and I was watching another channel called Casino for Life, and he made a video today. I thought that was really interesting concerning what we're talking about. And there's this basketball player called Kyrie Irving. You know who he is? Do you watch the NBA?
Yeah, I don't watch the NBA, but I'm familiar.
Kyrie Irving plays for the Brooklyn Nets, right? Mm-hmm. And it's this reporter that said that Kyrie Irving is the property of the Brooklyn Nets. Right? This is a white lady that said this to a black guy, Kyrie Irving, right? Now get this. The black guy, and I can show you the video, the black guy that's talking about this said she's correct. She said nothing wrong. That the NBA and that the Brooklyn Nets own Kyrie Irving. They pay him millions of dollars Kyrie Irving can make some of the money on his name, but the NBA is going to make most of the money off of his name and his talents and his skills. But he is owned by the NBA. Furthermore, if they don't want you no longer to play in Brooklyn, whether you like it or not, they could trade you. It's like you trade salt and pepper or whatever to another team to receive another player to the team. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. But people get sensitive about this topic, not understanding what's going on there, the contractual agreement that they had, and don't realize this is another form of slavery.
Yeah, I've heard that said about college football, where they take advantage of young people to play football for them for getting paid nothing. They get none of the money, but they're paid in a scholarship. But they have every right to pull that scholarship whenever they want. So if they're injured, they just lose that scholarship. And they don't, they take so much of their time playing football that they're not actually able to get the entire benefit of that scholarship. I've also heard this talked about a little bit when it comes to Disney. Mm-hmm.
Making all the money. Who's making all the money in the football situation?
No, yeah, absolutely. And so, like Disney is another example where you have a contract and you have a contract to behave in a specific way. You have a contract to you can't go out drinking. There can't be any pictures of you on air of you doing this or this. You can't be out having sex because we have an image with the company and we basically own you now. And so your face, your name is associated with our company. So you have to behave along these company standards. Another example is actually one of the new things that's going on around is called HoloLive. HoloLive is like an e-girl internet avatar that are animated. And so they kind of do what we do playing games, except they're internet avatars. And they have a company and they have to behave in a specific way and play the games that they're told to play and have a character and they have to play that character. And they can't be caught as that avatar doing anything else. And they can't collab. They can't be friends with. It's the same thing with Korean pop stars. A lot of pop stars, when you go to Korea specifically, have sign away their lives. They're only allowed to go where the company tells them they can go. They can only be seen where the company tells them to be seen. They tell them what to wear, how to dress. There's even clauses for some of them that their company is allowed to tell them what plastic surgery to get to maintain the image of that company. And so that is it's legal. They chose to sign it away. So where is that line? They're getting paid for it.
That scenario, I honestly can't give you my opinion. I'll have to look into that one more. In that scenario,
I think it actually might be interesting for you to actually to look into and discuss a little bit more, because it's a whole world of just bonkers bullshittery. That's like, I'm sorry, they do what? They tell this woman who is maybe 21 that she has to get ass and lip surgery, and she just has to go, oh, okay.
Yeah. And if I can say this is the reason why Matt Dillahunty doesn't want to have a debate with somebody like myself on this topic, because when I call the atheist experience, as I said before, I brought up the prison system and I brought up some other different types of slavery, and he knows that would have contradicted the arguments that he was making, that he knows he supports. If you watch it, you'll see that he does not condemn what goes on in the prison system. Does not condemn it.
Can you tell us a little bit about? Can you talk a little bit about what actually goes on in the prison system so people know what you're talking about?
Okay. So we're not going to talk about county. We're going to talk about. Let's talk about county first. County obviously has you in jail. You're behind a door. I wouldn't say it's bars, but it's behind a door with a piece of glass there. And then they have you in there for 6 to 7 hours at a time before they let you come out and stretch and interact with everybody. And I think that goes on at least twice, 3 times a day, I think. I wouldn't know. So it's either once or twice it goes on. And they give you just enough food, the government, that you don't get scurvy, that your gums don't start bleeding and you start getting weak.
Have an orange.
So, yeah, they basically eat cat food basically when it's time to eat. Now, when you go to prison, and you're in there for 50 years, 60 years, life or whatever, or 45 life.
Hell, even 10. Even 10.
If you mess up, they can throw you in a hole. The hole is when they throw you in a hole, there could be feces. I mean, actually, when you're in there, I believe they clean it before they put you in there, but they'll put you in there. You can pee and poop and all that stuff in there. They won't let you go to the bathroom like a normal person. And then they'll come in there and just fire hose you to clean you. So it isn't you come out and take a shower like a human being. There's fire
You treat animals better than that.
Yeah, and people want to say that's not slavery. And then on top of that, talk about this. Let me read something here because I actually have this. According to the 13th Amendment here, it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof that the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States for any subject to their jurisdiction. They know full well that when you go to prison, you are their slave. You are the property of the state. Then they can, just to get you out of prison, the loophole, if you want to call it that, is that they can have you work for a whopping 25 cents an hour or $2 a day or whatever. You know what I mean? And the major corporations, the stuff that you're making, there are corporations that can profit off of what you're making. And they want to say that the system is in slavery, but Matt Dillahunty supports it. He's against slavery. Get me a break.
I don't understand how you could possibly be a humanist and think that treating somebody like that is okay. I also can't imagine. So I know that solitary confinement is also a thing, and human beings biologically are social creatures. Whether you like it or not, we need other people. So solitary confinement, I can't imagine being viewed as anything except torture. But that shit will drive you crazy, like, very, very, very quickly. So how can you possibly have any kind of correctional facility that implements this kind of mental torture and physical torture, arguably? And how could you possibly be a humanist?
How do you go about punishing a thief? Best way to punish a thief is to make him pay restitution to the person that he stole something from. How do you pay restitution? Without involving slavery.
Well, if he's thieving and therefore doesn't have anything and has nothing to provide or pay restitution via, so like he doesn't have. So Kyle doesn't have anything. Kyle stole the non sequitur show. He's a thief. So, and he stole the show. He stole money. Let's say it's worth $100K. How is Kyle going to pay that back when he doesn't have a car, he doesn't have a place to live, like he doesn't have any of this shit? Should he be an indentured servant to Steve? Should he be making thumbnails until his dying breath for the non sequitur show?
Exactly. He should be the servant of Steve McRae. Now, Steve McRae might be saying, like, I don't want Kyle to be my servant. Steve, you need to think about that.
Steve might want that. I don't know.
That's a pretty fitting punishment for him. You know what I mean? So
right. So I think that you could probably say that there are situations where the instead of going to prison, you will be told by the government or by the judge. At least this happens in Canada. I don't know how much this happens in the States, to do volunteer work. So now you have to go and clean all of this thing. Does that count as being a slave?
Yeah, maybe an indentured servitude, but yep, it does.
So you did a crime towards the community that harmed the community. Now you have to pay the community back through menial labor that you are not paid to do.
But this is what the Bible teaches them. You know what I mean? The Bible, when it's talking about people becoming slaves, at least the Hebrews. Like I said, we'll talk about the wartime in a minute. Everybody thinks I'm avoiding that. If you stole something from somebody, you got to serve for 7 years or until the year of Jubilee. If you can't provide for yourself and you can't pay your bills or whatever, you can go into servitude. There's a whole bunch of different examples of this in the Bible. Even women can make themselves servants in order to be provided for, because again, they had a lower class. They wasn't like men. They depended on men back then. The feminist movement wasn't around back then. You know what I mean? And they depended on a man in order to survive. You know what I mean? If they couldn't get married, then this was another option for them to take care of themselves. But I got to say that, because sensitive people watching this, and they're probably yelling at me and calling me all kinds of stupid and whatnot. But they got to understand, that that we didn't have Social Security back then. There was no Social Security, there was no welfare, there was no POWs, there wasn't all these different things that we got today.
So
you know what I mean? If you
I want to clarify something. The only thing that I've seen people in the chat's actually been pretty nice to you so far. The only thing that I've seen in chat of people being concerned about is that you are a black person advocating for slavery. But I want to point out that, one, I have not heard you advocate for slavery at all yet. And
I'm
two,
not advocating for it. What I'm saying is how you treat these. How do you treat them when you get them? That's the issue, and that's what everybody gets bent out of shape about.
It sounds to me that what you're talking about more, I think people are kind of getting caught up in this in the just the slavery part, and they're not quite hearing the part of how you treat somebody matters no matter what position they're in. So people should be treated as people, whether you consider them a slave or whether you decide to call it community service. So just because you label it as you're a prisoner now, and so you don't have these rights, you still should be treated as a human, and stop beating around the bush and bullshitting people by calling it a different name when you're actually just treating these people worse than you would treat an animal.
Transatlantic slave trade would have been considered something totally different if take away all of the horrific things that happened to the people that came from Africa when they got over here and whatnot. So it would be something completely different in our history books. It had been done totally different. But fortunately, it wasn't. These people were stolen. They were mistreated. Some were thrown overseas because they died on the way getting here. They were auctioned off. They were treated. I mean, their dogs and their cats had more rights than the slaves when they got over here. They had
especially cats.
They have religion pushed on them. Atheists swear I don't know nothing about that, but I do. They have religion pushed on them. They had a lot of things that happened to them during the transatlantic slave trade. But if you talk to anybody who's black that believed that the transatlantic slave trade was something good, you make sure you find me, because I've been. It'd be something, because I don't know anybody in the black community that likes the transatlantic slave trade. Nobody, not even the most jaded Uncle Tom or the most jaded sellout is going to get on here and be dumb enough to sit there and say things about the transatlantic slave trade.
Padme the Cat for 666 says, "Can you remind G-Man that G-Cat owes me $5 still?"
Oh, okay. Let them know that G-Cat presently doesn't have a job yet, but when G-Cat gets a job, probably going out there catching some mice or something like that. G-Cat
do you think that you would be willing to come on to Non Sequitur Show once we get it back to talk to Jesse Lee Peterson?
Jesse, of course, yes, absolutely. A lot of people have been requesting that. I'd love to do that. What topic?
Can I call dibs? Can I call dibs to host that conversation on Non Sequitur?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. There you go, guys. Sold. All right, let's get back to the video a little bit more, because we've gotten off track from the video, but I think in a good way. Sorry, go ahead.
What topic? Slavery with Jesse Lee Peterson?
Maybe. We'll talk.
If I get to go, do I get to? Can I stop being nice if I talk to him?
Yes, I think so.
If I talk to him, okay, cool. Right, cool. So I'm not gonna...
We'll start out, and then we'll just escalate it up to dumpster fire.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, call it a dumpster fire. That's what it's probably gonna be.
You gotta get
anything that I think is gonna be.
Gotta get that nice slope climax. So Fuzz said something both of us kind of went on, and he had said that Amos 1, 2, and 8 condemned human trafficking, and Isaiah 58 and 61 was also condemning human trafficking, but we couldn't find that. Now, I was looking at the NIV version, so maybe he was looking at another version, and you didn't see that either, right?
No, I didn't see it either when we were looking for it.
Okay, so you don't think that God condemned human trafficking, or do you not think that Isaiah said that, or like what's your stance on that one?
I'm smart enough to see the passage first before I say anything. So as far as I know, I don't even see it going on in Scripture. And if he's talking about capturing people in war, if he ain't talking about that, then I need to see the Scripture that he's talking about in what the person is saying, and they're not going to respond to it.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And we kind of talked about hired labor at a low amount, and we talked about what would be, do you think, the difference between a debt slave and a debt servant? Would those be the same thing? I think those would be the same thing. Okay. Now, the only thing that we really had left then that I think both of us were kind of really putting a giant question mark on was this idea of breeding slaves. Like, so for men, it was okay for them to be doing one thing and breeding that way. It almost seems to me that there weren't really it wasn't really covered very much in the Bible about whether or not you were having sex with your male slaves, because that wasn't really something that was expected to happen, I guess. I mean, why would a woman be owning slaves in biblical times, right? Like, a woman wouldn't be owning anything.
I think it's an issue of interpretation of that passage, because I'll admit, when I was listening to who was speaking, that was Dr. Josh that actually said that, and he brought up something that we rarely talk about, and that's from Deuteronomy 21 verse 2 to verse 18 or 20 or something like that, he said.
Yes, I actually have that up. I'll put it on screen. Let me pull that up.
Yeah, you can. There's a KJV version of it, and then there's the NIV, which is a little bit easier to read. I hate to admit this, but I had to go to the NIV to get a better understanding of what was being said there. And I found a commentary that did a good job of explaining what's going on there. Because I actually called Vecco before I came in here and asked him about this, and he wasn't even 100% sure about this. But I have it in front of me here, so I'll actually read it if you want.
Yeah, please, by all means.
Let me read it from the NIV, because I was wondering if this was slavery. I thought this was something totally different, and I had a feeling that this verse was going to come up. So, this is the NIV. So I'm gonna read from Exodus 21. Verses 7 to 11, and this is what it says. A man sells his daughter as a servant. She is not to go free as a male servants do. So obviously there's a difference between the two. If she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for his son, must grant the rights of a daughter. If he marries, I see now. Okay, if he selects her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. If he does not provide her with these three things, she is to go free without any payment or money. Okay, so the first thing that we got to acknowledge here is that there's a rule here for a woman servant here. Second thing is that he has the right to give this woman servant to his son. Now that would make sense, because in ancient Israel, a woman depended on a man to protect them. Again, the feminist movement didn't exist yet.
So a quick question then: if he selects her for his son, means she's now to marry his son, or she is now to bear a son? Because I read that as if she's going to be the one to give birth to his son.
No, don't say nothing like that. It says that he can give her to her son. I'm assuming she has to agree to it, because there are some laws in the Old Testament.
It does say that she has marital rights. Yeah, it says that she has marital rights. So if she has marital rights, then she would have to agree to anything past the point of the initial contract.
Right. If she has marital rights too, if and this is where it gets tricky, because I got to keep reading this here, because I looked at this earlier and I was like, what? So anyway, it says if he selects her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter, right?
So that means she goes from wife rights, because she has marital rights, to she doesn't lose anything in that transition. She's now inherits the same way she would inherit if she becomes a daughter with a son, right?
Yeah, but the next verse says, if he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first for food. So this would this would entail that you can have multiple wives at this particular point. So
Right.
This is a tricky scripture, scripture here. But in to what Dr. Josh was talking about, this isn't breeding or anything like that. This is just an owner doing, having.
Yeah, this is definitely not breeding slaves. I think what Dr. Josh had said was that men were used for breeding slaves, but if you were to bring in a woman, her status changes permanently. So that's why she doesn't lose marital rights, and why she then gains the rights of a daughter. She doesn't go back. It's not like you can dump her ass and then say, okay, but marry my son as a slave now, so you're back to square one. Like that seems to me that the Bible's saying, no, you don't get to do that shit.
Right. And then it says that if these three things are not provided, then she goes away with nothing. So again, this is an example of the owner being protected, the slave being protected, the woman in this case being protected, and making sure that she gains marital rights if she ends up marrying this person. But if they don't get married, you know what I mean, and she's not provided these things, she's to go free. So I don't know where the breeding part comes from. There's a lot of opinion in there.
So I would have a question though. So if she was married, let's say, so she got marital rights, but then the husband decides, I'm not going to give her these three things, so she's no longer getting food, clothing, and those rights anymore, kicks her out, which is like she gets to go free. She's not a virgin anymore. She could be X age. She's not getting any money to do anything.
No. You couldn't. Where does this? That would violate the Mosaic law, because you couldn't just divorce somebody for that. You know what I mean? It had to be for marital unfaithfulness. That was the only reason Moses gave them to get divorced. So they couldn't do that. You'll notice that it says that she'll gain the marital rights. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but here it says if he does not. But here it says if he does not provide her with these three things. So basically, if she is neglected, she's allowed to leave, but she doesn't get any payment or anything. But in context of what time period this is in, what's she supposed to do?
Well, again, I think there's a misunderstanding there. I think that in this passage, you know what? I'm gonna go look at this, and when I come back on your channel, I'll talk about this in greater detail.
Yeah, no, I'm totally fine to leave that question hanging. Maybe Dr. Josh, actually, who I did just see Digital Hammurabi show.
And the next time I come here, let's do that, because I don't want to say that, and then I go to the Christian community when I'm like, they're like, you're wrong, G-man. So I'm gonna. No,
absolutely, I'm totally down. I'll write it down.
This is the first time I've had to actually respond to this particular passage of scripture on YouTube or whatever. So I'll definitely come back here and exegete this.
This is 11. This is 11. So I'll take.
I'll
make a note for next time.
These crazy topics, right?
Yeah. So is there anything else in Exodus 21 you want to talk about? I don't want to hold you to some shit. Okay, and the other one you had was Deuteronomy 15, right?
Yeah.
I think that had something to do with something that Matt had told you, right?
No, actually, this is something that I wanted to bring up about Deuteronomy 15, because Matt Dillahunty always talks about how, slavery is used as a loophole to own somebody forever. Mm-hmm. How, give me 1 second to find you. Okay, here we go. Slavery is used as a loophole. How is it immoral? God, but ideally speaking, he would have rather not slavery slavery should not be your first option in the Bible. Let me show you why. In Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 10, Deuteronomy 24, 20 through 21, and Deuteronomy 15, verses 7 and 8, it's talking about gleaning, the poor being able to glean the fields, and Israelites being commanded literally to lend to the poor, not telling the poor no, to literally lend to the poor. Have your hands wide open, according to what it says, and lend to the poor. If these things were done, there would be no reason for you to make yourself an indentured servant. You know what I mean? So if you actually did what the law said, and that's not picked up everything off the ground, like if those apples falling down, you're not supposed to pick them all up. The ones that are on the edges are supposed to be for the poor, and that's how they would take care of themselves. We see this going on in the book of Ruth.
Yes. Yeah, you do.
When she first Boaz. And then there's a law saying that that the Israelites had to lend to the poor, and there will be a blessing that will be followed by this. And if they didn't do it, a curse will be followed by this. They didn't lend to the poor. So if the Israelites actually did this, which they stopped doing over time or whatever, but if they actually did this, there will be no reason for a person to become an indentured servant or have to sell themselves or anything like that. You know what I mean? In order to survive.
I see what you're saying. Okay, so basically what you're getting at is that if the Israelites were behaving in a way that they were dictated to by God, then the amount of giving to the poor would mean that none of the people that were there should have had to go into slavery in the first place.
I don't know about the word dictated, but yes, I'll say that for the sake of the conversation. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever. Pick another word. The way that God said, "Hey, listen, this is the best way to live. You should live this way." do the thing.
You're looking after the poor, and you didn't have to become an indentured servant. At that point, the only way that you would become a slave if you broke the law, if you stole something from somebody, and then you would have to pay restitution. 7 years or until the year of Jubilee.
Right, because then that's a different situation. That's now you've stolen, now you've done somebody wrong, and you need to make up for that wrong.
We practice this in America, though. But the funny thing is, who benefits from it? I know that if you commit a misdemeanor, or I think if you commit a misdemeanor, you can be given up to 100 hours or 300 hours of community service, right? And if you pay all particular time and you go see a parole officer, it could be taken off your record altogether, or you could just be let off the hook at that particular point, right? But who does that money go to? Go to the government, the corporations, or does it go to the person that has been wronged?
Yeah, you guys have privatized. Oh no, that's actually a really good point, because America has privatized prisons, and so the person who was wronged doesn't reap any of the benefits of that person being imprisoned. Only the corporation does, right?
Right, unless they fine you, and then when they fine you, that money that goes toward the fine goes to the people. But for as far as I know, that doesn't happen. They don't give that money to them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I've never heard of that happening.
It should be a system of restitution where if I come into your house right now and I take that's a very big tablet you got there, or computer that you got behind you on the side of you. If I come in and I take that at your house.
This is my art tablet. One of them. I have more than one.
I go there and take all of them, and I get caught and I'm brought to prison here in the United States.
Please don't. This is the way I survive.
And I take it. There should be a system of restitution where you can get those things back or get the money that you need to buy new ones.
Right.
But as far as I know, our system doesn't provide that. The corporations get what they need, though.
Okay, no, I think that would be, I think that's an interesting thing to discuss that I think we should also save for another day, because we are past the hour mark. So you're talking about, like, what might be an interesting discussion we could have is, what changes would you make to the current American prison system? We've got about a half an hour if you want to go into that now, but I would imagine you want to take some time to kind of look through some stuff.
The things I want to change about the American prison system. First of all, they have to get rid of the hole. That's number one.
Oh, he's ready. He knows. Go.
I don't think the life sentence needs to exist. The death penalty, you might not agree with this, but I do believe in the death penalty. The death penalty needs to stay there. I think the death penalty, you might find this to be a little odd, but I believe that if a man rapes a woman, that person should get the death penalty.
Okay.
Or let's say he's worth $1 million, to make it hurt and make him understand that he shouldn't be doing stuff like this, half of his fortune should be given to the victim. That's his fortune. His house, everything that he has.
Do you think that if there is, so I know some places require or force marriage between the victim and the rapist. Do you think that that should be allowed if the woman makes that decision? If assuming the woman is the one getting raped, I know it's a stereotype that I should not be making because it's not the case. It could be a man and a man. It could be a woman raping a man. If the victim gets to decide whether or not,
maybe she drugs him or whatever. I don't know how that would happen. Tried to drug him. Oh my god.
Women can be bullies. Women can be bullies too. So if the victim says okay, like should that be an option if both parties agree. So, like, if a rape takes place and both parties agree to get married under no outside influence, under no pressure, like, there's no, like, somebody's forcing you to do it. There's none of that going on. Do you think that's an option that should be allotted, provided both parties agree? Because I think we would both agree that if one of the parties doesn't agree to marriage, a marriage should not be happening.
Exactly. I totally agree with that, yeah. I agree that if they agree, it's okay. But if they don't agree, then no. Now, there is a situation like that in the Bible, but that is definitely a conversation for another day, because we would have to read the passages in the Bible concerning that, because there's a lot of arguments made about that in Scripture. So
yeah, I think that would be another discussion. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting topic. I don't know how to think
be a
about
lot more severe than what it is. Penalty for rape is nowhere near as severe.
Oh my God! What's that guy's name? I forget. He was the guy who was caught and convicted of raping a woman in college behind a dumpster. Jake something, I think. I don't remember the guy's name. I'm a bad person. That guy only got like 6 months in prison or some shit, and it was like, are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? And it was like, yo, but he's on the swim team. And I was like, oh, okay.
Somebody like that should have been put on the electric chair. And no, not lethal injection, the electric chair. That's what should have happened.
Okay, listen.
So, oh, you're being too extreme. No, I'm not being too extreme. You're not the one being raped.
Now I'm gonna get in trouble. Oh. If you're going to have the death penalty, I think the way you go about death should matter. I think that's a conversation. So if you're going to allow for the death penalty, then what kind of penalty is it going to be outside of the death itself? So I wouldn't go with a lethal injection. I also wouldn't go with the electric chair. Bring back the guillotine. If you're gonna do it right. Bring back the guillotine. It's low maintenance. It's heavy enough you don't even have to keep the damn thing sharp, and it's clean. It's a clean cut. It's done, dusted, and you don't have like lineups and lineups of people waiting to die. You can you pass them through. Just pass them through.
No, don't bring back the guillotine. The electric chair will be just fine. Unfortunately, I believe that every state's going to be using the guillotine, whether I like it or not. So, you know, it is what it is. Oh,
come on. I mean, all right, I'll give you that it's a little bit more messy in that, like, there's going to be a lot of blood everywhere. All right, but that
ain't the reason why I got concerns about the guillotine.
You just put it in a room that's got like a lot of tiling, because tile's going to be easy to clean, and you put like showers around the outside, and you treat it like a dishwasher that you press the button and it washes itself internally, right?
I got sense. No. I understand you want to preserve organs and all that stuff and whatnot, but
that's it. I didn't even think of that. Oh my God, I didn't even consider that. No, you're right. You could totally harvest all them organs.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe the electric chair, because that's a more painful way to go. So
okay, so yeah, that's what I mean. So do you think that if you're gonna be pro death penalty, do you think that there should be different options? So maybe the guillotine for some people, and the electric chair for other people, and lethal injection for other people, and then maybe some people just get shot in the head, or some people get catapulted, and like you see how many times they bounce.
The Bible had different flavors of punishment. Some of them, again, went indentured service. Some of them were slaves. Some of them were stoned to death. Some of them had to go through some other things. You know what I mean?
Right.
Bottom line is, if depending on the crime, the punishment should fit the crime.
Flamethrower.
The punishment should scare people into not wanting. Because today, who the heck is afraid to go into jail? I mean, you get a roof over your head, you get 3 meals. You know what I mean? County, I'm talking about, not prison.
Right.
County.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? People are bragging about going there.
So
they're like, oh, I'm going to go to jail 3 months, we're going to get some food, getting some
depending on the crime, would depend on like which crime you committed, or like the severity of the crime would change what death penalty you got, like how you died. And then, okay, so can we do like an American Idol where we get to, like, they'll do like a mini documentary about the person's crime and their life and who they were, and then people can vote on what death penalty they get. If you're gonna do it, like, you may as well go all out. Like, the people get to decide, right? Like, that's how stoning worked in biblical times. They, like, a group of people would get together and stone somebody.
Actually, it was more specific than that. If you caught the person in the act of adultery, you were supposed to be the one that would.
Yeah, now you're responsible for it. This is Rule 34 on the internet. If there's porn, like, if it exists, there's porn, and then Rule 34A is that if porn does not exist, you are now responsible for creating the porn. The internet is more biblical.
All I know is that if a person went to jail for 6 months for raping somebody, you're encouraging people to do it at that point. You're not scaring nobody.
Well, there's also really like the amount of rape that happens in prison, which isn't okay. Like, if you're in one of the most secure facilities,
gonna happen to him.
Right? If you're in one of the most secure facilities, crime shouldn't be happening in that secure facility. That's the whole point.
It's not supposed to be treated like a secure facility. It's supposed to be a place where you're a servant to your master. You know what I mean? So they allow certain things to happen to you in there to teach you not to come back here again. So
right.
they're going to allow you to be raped in the shower. They're going to allow you to be raped in yourself.
That's not okay.
You can be banging on the door calling for the guard. It don't matter. They're still going to rape you and still going to do what they're going to do to you.
Yeah. I don't agree with that. Like, I don't think I don't, and I can't imagine that somebody who calls themselves a humanist should be okay with something like that. It shouldn't be. Like, you should be pro, like, the whole point of humanism is pro treating humans like humans, and all humans should be treated equally. So in what case would that ever be I don't know. I'm starting to talk with my hands.
I gotta learn how to use this Discord. I really gotta learn how to use this Discord like you're doing it here. How many people
I'll hook you up. I'll hook you up with that. So you
should definitely look up Veckel and try to get him to talk about this topic too.
Yeah, sure. I have a couple of questions from the chat, and one of them is, are you okay with prison rape? And I would imagine no from what we discussed, right?
No. No,
so,
I'm not okay with that. What kind of question is that?
You're not okay with that. You're not okay with the transatlantic slave trade, because I think people get that confused about your position, very, very much so. You're not okay with that. You're not okay with people not being treated as if they're human. But you think that contracts should be allowed to be formed, and you just don't want to beat around the bush and not call it slavery when, in your opinion, it is.
Right.
I think that's totally fair. I don't know why people have so much of a goddamn problem with you.
The gentleman that was on this, well, the reason why they got a problem with me is that I had my discussion with Matt Dillahunty. There was so much confusion involved in our conversation that nobody understood where everybody was coming from. Matt was just interested in trying to embarrass me, and I was trying to prove that to him the first call that God existed. The second call, we got into it, and we really never established definitions or nothing. It was just, he was trying to show me off, and people took it at me trying to show him off. What I was trying to do, and what I'm still trying to do, is try to get him to see you're wrong on this topic. That's my entire thing. If he sees that he's wrong, he can pick something else in the Bible that he disagrees with.
I don't know if you saw my most recent video about some shit that Matt got onto on Twitter, but he seems to do that. He seems to have a chip on his shoulder and be trying to argue all the time, to the point where I don't think he's reading or listening to what the person is saying. He's just waiting for them to be done so he can brush them off. And I think that's a problem.
And then if you listen to the community that supports him, they believe that he's got a victory because he did this. But if you ask them to tell you in a paragraph why he won the conversation, they can't do it.
No. All right, Padme the Cat for 666 said, the amount of people executed that were found innocent after they were killed by the state is over 100. Does one dead innocent ruin the idea? For Mr. Godly, I think they're referring to you.
Well, you're talking about for the prison system?
Yeah, so the death penalty kills one innocent person or 100 innocent people. Does that still? There's
been corruption in the in the justice system of every country that's ever existed. That just can't be helped. All we can hope for is that you're going to get you're going to get honest judges, and you're going to get people that can't get paid off, and people that's going to do their jobs and make sure they actually get the real criminals. The death penalty must exist because we got to make examples out of people who break the law. Again, if you just give somebody for raping somebody, you can expect more women to be raped. And if you have them sitting in prison, then you're condoning slavery. Just let me say this: if you have them sitting in prison for their whole life, then you're basically saying it's okay for these corporations to make all of this money because that person is sitting on their behind in the prisons. And if the corporations aren't making the money, then who is paying for the person to be in that cell to begin with? You got to think about this stuff.
So, would you say that it's not like somebody who's innocent getting killed due to the death penalty isn't a fault of the death penalty, it's a fault of corruption within the system or failure of the system? So it's a different problem. You would separate that problem out.
Corruption. It's corruption in the sense that we know that judges are getting bribed. In other words, like, have you heard, this is a little bit off topic, just bear with me and we're going to get back on this, okay? Have you heard about, for example, how black people commit more crimes per capita than any other group of people out there, right? We've heard this, right? My argument against that has always been that you got people with better lawyers than others, and that's why they're able to get off. That's why we don't say it's another group of people or nothing like that, right? You got white collar crimes, you got like all kinds of different crimes that's going on. Going back to what we was originally talking about, right? If you got the money to pay off a lawyer, or if you got, to pay off a judge or to pay off the system, then you are more than likely not going to jail. Like O.J. Simpson's a great example of this.
Oh,
you know what I mean? I'm sorry, I believe he did it. I think it's overwhelming evidence to suggest that he did it. The glove is not enough for me. I'm sorry, but he did it, right? So OJ got away with it because OJ had money.
Okay, I think there's a lot of I think there's a lot of examples of people getting away with shit that they wouldn't otherwise not, if they didn't have the money to, they wouldn't have gotten away with it. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with you there. So essentially, you're saying that if the system ran the way it was supposed to, then no innocent people should be dying in the first place. So you've got a separate problem. The problem isn't with the punishment. The problem is with the system that put the person there in the first place.
Right.
Kawasa, Kawasa for 10 says, surprisingly good convo. I fully expected a huge mess. Congratulations, we didn't have a complete dumpster fire. So, I think this is a good place to end. I think that whether or not the death penalty should be a thing that exists or not is an entirely separate conversation that we're not having tonight, but could be a conversation down the line, and then we can pull statistics and we can have that kind of a conversation on another day. But do you have any last words, and we'll wrap her on up?
I love talking about this topic of slavery in the Bible, and I would love a one-on-one conversation with Matt Dillahunty in a fair format, and I'm willing to pay the man $1,500. $2,000 is too much money for him because he's losing popularity right now. So $1,500 now, maybe next year it'll only be $1,000.
Oh, well, shots fired. I'm more than happy to host, but I don't think Matt Dillahunty would want me around. Thank you so much for coming.
I would give you cash. Cash.
Cold hard. If you guys want to know a little bit more what we were talking about, go check out Agree to Argue at their YouTube channel. Links will be in the description down below for G-Man as well as to Agree to Argue. They have another episode talking about this later on in the month, so if you want to go check out their second video on it and their first video, those links will also be in the description once they become available. And like, subscribe, and all that garbage, whatever. Join the Patreon, I don't fucking care. I'll see you guys later. Bye. Bye.